This episode of The Candid Frame is sponsored by the Charcoal Book Club. The Charcoal Book Club is a monthly subscription service for photo book enthusiasts. Working with the most respected names in contemporary photography, Charcoal selects and delivers essential photo books to a worldwide community of collectors. Each month, members receive a signed first edition monograph and an exclusive print to add to their collections. Join the club by visiting charcoalbookclub.com and use the promo code TheCandidFrame at checkout and receive a 10% discount on your first membership payment. We also have the support of LensRentals.com, the largest online camera rental house in the U.S. They carry the most popular brands and models of cameras and lenses, but also anything you need for video, lighting, post-processing accessories, and so much more. Whether you need something for a one-time assignment or want to test it out before you buy, LensRentals.com is there to help. Explore their extensive inventory and save 10% off your first order when you sign up for their newsletter at LensRentals.com/newsletter. When it comes to a personal fashion sense, I differentiate between people who are stylish and those who have style. For me, the former is about people who follow trends, or those who, because they are on the cutting edge, help to create them. People who have style are a thing to themselves. The way they dress is an expression of who they are. When you see them, you immediately know you're seeing someone unique and genuine. It's that quality that drew photographer Andria Lo and writer Valerie Luu to create their project, Chinatown Pretty. They approached senior-aged Chinese men and women who live in Chinatowns in the U.S. and Canada who possess that unique sense of style. They not only photographed them, but convinced them to share their personal stories of living in the U.S. and in Canada. The resulting book showcases the wonderful aesthetic of these people, who provide us a glimpse into the richness of the Chinese American community. This is Ibarian X, and welcome back to The Candid Frame. I'm enjoying the book. I'm glad I found out about it. It's been a lovely tome to go through. And it really has sort of opened my eyes to something that was always in front of me forever, especially since, I've frequented the downtown's Chinatown many a time. And it's really revealed something very special to me that I'm looking forward to revisiting, with this fresh perspective. Tell us about how this began for you guys, because I read in the book that you guys hung out a lot and you would have dim sum at a restaurant. You're always observing these people coming by. How did that appreciation of these people turn into an idea that you collaborated on?
Yeah, so Andrea and I would go on these dim sum dates in Chinatown, and we both had a visceral reaction to the street style that we observed on the senior citizens there. We'd be like, oh, did you see that hat and those shoes and that outdoor pajama set? It made our heart race, made our eyes go super wide. And so we just wanted to investigate and understand how these senior citizens compose their outfits, and more importantly, where they got their shoes.
So what was it about the style of the seniors, where there was something specifically about these older people and their fashion style that really piqued your interest much more so than, the other sort of fashionistas that are out there of a much younger demographic? What was the fascination with people in their, 70s and 80s and sometimes even older?
I think a underlying theme that we see in the outfits, because they're quite varied, so the style it tends to be a patchwork. So it's a mix of patterns, colors, eras. So a lot of clothes they've had for many decades, which we might think of as vintage clothing, but it's really just clothes they've kept for like 40 years, along with a lot of gifted items and clothes that they make themselves. So like the hat that Val's wearing is like hand crocheted. So there's a lot of these accessories because the seniors tend to be very resourceful or maybe worked professionally as seamstresses. So it's kind of all of that together. And I think what we notice is that there tends to be a story behind these outfits that you can you start to see it emerge. And so that sparked this curiosity to know more about it, because with all the juxtapositions of different elements, it just, it really invites a lot of questions and a lot of curiosity.
Yeah, because I had noted just in my own experiences on the street, the layering that happens, the vests, the different shirts, the jackets, and it never made much sense to me, probably because I have no fashion sense to begin with. But it was really interesting to see that it was born out of a level of practicality, especially with contending with the weather, especially in cities in San Francisco. But there nevertheless was, for many of these people, a sense of, if not so much style, about how certain clothes, made them feel, which I guess is as much a fashion quality as anything else. Is that something that you already knew of, or you became aware of as you started photographing and talking with these people?
One of our main observations is that they're dressing to keep the sun out, but also to keep warm at the same time. So a lot of layers and wide brimmed hats. We noticed that Chinatown senior citizens are the ultimate urban dwellers. So they're the ones that are like taking the bus into Chinatown or wherever they're going, grocery shopping that day, having a cart for their groceries, wearing appropriate layers for when it gets windy, having a fanny pack or backpack to keep their belongings in. And they have to dress for all seasons and all kind of like situations. And so I think that informs a lot of their outfits is, keeping warm, being ready to be out in the street for a while.
It was really interesting to find out that some of the clothing they had for decades, a jacket or a sweater. Man, I don't have anything that's I've had for that long, or anything that would have lasted for that long. And that was really a sort of a fascinating aspect. And I suspect it's practical, that they had those clothes, but it was really interesting to think about these people in terms of how they relate to their clothes. It's not like, you think of some Instagram fashion person who has this walk-in closet with endless clothes, that these people likely have a smaller selection of clothing that's either been gifted to them or that they had for a long time. I noted several times that people had gotten stuff from China or from Hong Kong decades before, and that it was still part of their wardrobe. Finding out in terms of how these people basically brought together their own designs must have been one of the more pleasing things to find out, along with, at least getting to know the person and getting to photograph them.
It can be a good conversation starter. So, all those things you noted were things that we were wondering about too. When you have clothes that are from the 60s that look like they were made by a tailor, that the style is like a little bit more Hong Kong or from China, it definitely creates this sensibility that we don't see on the street as much these days. I think you're right. There's a lot of holding on to clothes, and we found the seniors tend to preserve their clothes really well. They treat them well, which much better, I think, than I can say I do. So they'll have, for example, the Jangs who wore this matching yellow sweatsuit, and they would wear that to exercise. They'd had those sweatsuits for 40 years, and they looked bright yellow, brand new. So it's pretty impressive, kind of the care that they take with their clothing as well.
Tell me about approaching these people, because I know that you faced a great challenge in terms of getting people to stop and talk with you and pose for your camera. From reading it, at least one of the dialects that they spoke was Cantonese, and there was another language or dialect that was spoken that neither of you speak. So how did you guys negotiate that whole challenge of being able to communicate with these people and explain to them what you were doing?
It's a street style project. So we go out to Chinatown, usually for about 3 hours at a time. And since neither of us speak the language, Toisanese or Cantonese, we usually have an interpreter with us. And so usually be a group of 3 of us, and we just take laps until we meet, someone that catches our eye and that we want to speak to. And then it's really about catching up with them and hoping that they'll stop, take time out of their busy day to chat with us. So we have a 90% rejection rate. So most of the time people will be like, thank you, with their palm in the air, meaning no thanks. But if we are lucky to get them to stop, We then kind of like compliment them and tell them what we notice about them, let the conversation evolve naturally to like, what are you up to that day? Or, where did you move from? Where are you from originally? And then at the end, we share what our project is about and then have them sign a consent form. So there's a lot of barriers. It's a whole dance that we do.
Yeah. Andrea, for you as the photographer, that's a lot of pressure to feel like, okay, now they've said yes, and now you get to pull off a good image. So what were your considerations every time you found someone who was agreeable to being interviewed and being photographed?
Right. Sometimes we're meeting people at the bus stop, which is actually a great place to scout for people because they're sort of, they're just there kind of bored. But the issue is that sometimes the bus comes and then right when we start talking with them, so they have to hop on the bus and we might get, just like 5 seconds to really capture them. So that can be the challenge. It's a risk, but we'll take it. So yeah, sometimes it's super ephemeral, and I just have to be, while Val's kind of chatting them up, trying to ask them questions, I'll just look around, trying to see where I might want to get my angle, see what I might want to include in the shot, where if they do have extra time, like where can I kind of bring them where the light might be a little more optimal. So it is sort of thinking ahead, a lot of thinking on my feet, as street photography goes. So it definitely keeps me on my toes. And I think that's, as far as the photography aspect, that's something I enjoy about the project is you really kind of never know what you're going to get. You kind of just have to take the shot and be really quick about it and hope you got something good. So we'll take as long as they'll give us, but a lot of times it is just a few moments and we have to make do.
Yeah. Besides the overall portrait that I enjoyed looking at, it was really wonderful when you guys would focus on particular details. Like there's one fellow who's wearing a vest and it's kept closed using clothespins. Not clothespins?
Safety pins.
Safety pins? Safety pins. And I just love that. That little quality that says so much about him, and just the idea that it's something that probably most people would never pick up, but you were able to isolate in that photograph. Stuff like that was probably one of the great pleasures. And you can tell me, but for me as a photographer, I would feel like when I see little details like that, my synapses start firing because it just fleshes out the character beyond just being an interesting face.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I know. I think we both get very excited when we saw those little details and a lot of times surprises. So that was sort of the joy of once we get to observe closer, because a lot of times they look great from far away, these bold patterns, bold colors. But then as you observed, as we get closer, all those little great details like the hand stitching or the ways that they'll customize the clothes to make them work better for themselves. So that might be, adding interior pockets to their jackets, which we see a ton, just these like little patches that they'll sew in there to keep their essentials in and little things like that. So that's actually some feedback that we've gotten from others, including the children of some of the people we photographed. It's like, I kind of never noticed these small details and kind of the beauty in them. I mean, I love that people are now observing that themselves and have learned to appreciate the beauty in those details.
Making the discovery about those secret pockets, that was wonderful. I love that idea. Then when you guys mentioned about the elastic pants, and that you use that sort of as a way of commiserating with each other, that you're all wearing it. It was just, it's like reading a rich short story or a novel where those small little details just bring something to life. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about the book, both in terms of the imagery and the text, is those little details that really make each person and each experience really unique, right? Because I think that, especially now, because of all the violence towards Asian Americans in the past several months, one of the things that I really love about the book, and I would hope that anybody who picks it up appreciates it, is sort of the humanity that you bring to people who are otherwise ignored, not just because they're Asian American, but just because they're older. We tend to sort of like see an old person and just not even give them any sort of attention, much less engage with them in a direct way. And I know that one of the people who you interviewed in the book made that comment, that how much they appreciated that you guys took the time to speak with them. Though many people were reluctant to have you photograph them and to be interviewed by you. Tell me about that part of that, about being able to engage with people and have them share your stories. What do you think helped you, besides the translator, to be able to connect with those people and have them be willing to share themselves with you?
I think just showing like a genuine interest. And like, there's so much to learn if you pay attention, right? Like secret pockets. Someday soon, we'll be putting them in our pants, or, maybe they'll make them like that in the future. Really comfortable shoes. Like right now I'm rocking San Antonio Shoemakers, or SAS shoes. They're like preferred by the older set, but I'm like, this is great for walking in on the daily. So yeah, there's just so much to learn by paying attention. And I think they are willing to open up because maybe they don't get asked these questions all the time. So they're caught off guard and maybe also kind of intrigued and have a lot to share. Most people have experienced war. They have immigrated here, maybe not knowing English, maybe had to work their second or third career well into their 60s. They've had to start over in so many different fronts. And so I think they have a lot of wisdom to share. And we're so lucky that over 100 of them, shared their wisdoms for this project.
I was glad that you included, the history behind these respective Chinatowns, how they were the result of the Chinese labor that came first for the gold rush and later on for the building of the railroads, and how the Chinese Exclusion Act, affected where they could live and where they could buy property. And as a result, these communities were sort of like the home for these Chinese populations, for decades. But it's interesting to see what the population is sort of made up now, that these are people who may have lived in the suburbs at one point, but they're coming to these communities because they want to have a sense of belonging rather than just being alone. And that was another really interesting thing to sort of read about, is how important their times in the parks, at the market, at the community center are. Tell us about, that aspect of your discovery in terms of what kept these people, it seems like, young and active, and not, because it's amazing because I'm looking at 80-year-old people living by themselves to a large extent, and then yet they're still out there being able to do just that. It's very inspiring.
Right. I mean, Chinatowns are some of the most densely populated neighborhoods, I think. And that's why we were first drawn to it as far as people watching, because there's so much going on, so much to observe. And what we've noticed is that a lot of the seniors, they don't need to drive in Chinatowns. They are able to walk to buy their groceries every morning, to buy fresh groceries, to go see their doctor. They can see their friends in the park. Everything that they need on a daily basis is within, a mile of them. And as far as language, they don't, if they don't speak English very well, most of the people we meet, mainly speak Chinese. So it really is an enclave that they can feel comfortable in, where they can get by and communicate. So I think that's really important. Important to realize too, is that this is where they can feel at home. Yeah, Chinatowns are very important as a neighborhood and as a landing pad for immigrants. And we've learned so much about Chinatown, the neighborhood, through doing the project. We first started the project, really curious about the fashion. But as we started to talk to the people we were photographing and meeting, we learned, there's so much more to dig into. There's so many stories to learn. There's a lot of wisdom to be shared. And Chinatown plays a big part of that. I think the project in a lot of ways is, this love letter to the neighborhood as well.
Valerie, you're a writer. Andria, you're the photographer, bringing very different skill sets to it. How do you feel each of you helped the other in terms of being able to produce the work, other than, fulfilling one particular role?
Andria had a great observation or note where she was like, we gave each other the energy to do this because, as we mentioned earlier, we have a 90% rejection rate. So we depend and we feed off each other's energy a lot. So even though, we'll go out for 3 hours and maybe are lucky to get 1 or 2 people that are willing to participate in the project, we at least get a relish in the highs and the lows together, and the wins and also the losses are the ones that got away. So I think that's a big part of our partnership is going out there, hitting the streets for, 6 years together and keeping up that energy and that enthusiasm.
And for you, Andrea?
Yeah, I mean, this is a project that 100% I wouldn't have, it's not something I think we could both do individually. It really is a true collaboration and a product of bringing our different skill sets together. And as well, not just our skill sets, but also, our different personalities. I'm pretty introverted. I'm not as prone to chatting people up on the street, but that is, one of Valerie's superpowers is talking to strangers. So, we're able to get these stories and we're able to get the seniors to open up to us because of Val's personality and the persistence. And yeah, also, like she said, it really was really helpful to have someone to share, not only in the joy, but the heartbreak that we would experience over and over again, 9 out of 10 times. So that's a big part of the project it's been the challenge of being rejected. And I think that's not something that I would have wanted to face alone, to be honest. But it was fun to do it with Val because it made it more of an experience, it wasn't about the rejection. It was about the highs of actually enjoying the highs together of when we could actually grab a portrait and talk with them.
In some of the profiles, we discover extensive stories about people's lives. There's a woman who was a cabaret dancer, and that's how she supported herself and her family. There was another person who was imprisoned in China for a couple of decades. And there are others where the story is relatively brief. And I'm wondering in terms of what you guys faced in terms of soliciting stories from people, because I know that some people may have been very reluctant to share personal things, and others were more readily did. But talk about the desire and what you guys learned in terms of what may have been effective for you to be able to elicit that from the people you were talking to.
I think a huge part of it just came down to time. Like, did they have to board a bus in 5 minutes? And then, Estelle Kelly, who was a cabaret dancer, she was connected to us through her granddaughter, who Andrea is friends with. And so we were able to have multiple visits with her. And because she kind of was born in the U.S. and spent a lot of her childhood here, it was easier to communicate with her because she could speak English. And then some people, there's the time aspect. And I think Asian culture in general tends to be more private. And we are coming out with them with a lot. There's a gaggle of women being like, oh my God, you look fantastic. Can we talk to you? Can we take your photo? What's your life story? What are you up to today? So it's a lot. It depends on the person and sometimes their mood that day and how much time they have. One story that comes to mind is the red hat. She was someone we met in Chicago, Chinatown. And her caretaker brought her to listen to Chinese opera in the library. There's a lot of programming for senior citizens there, especially since the weather can be a little touch and go. And she brought up the war and how she lived in Toisan or that part of China, and villages were burned down. Everyone had to flee. And then she just stopped. And our interpreter was like, I don't know if it's a matter of her not remembering or not, or if it's too painful to talk about. There's a lot of trauma there. And she was able to talk about some of it, but definitely not all of it. And we understand why.
Yeah. My parents, similar, they came from growing up in a dictatorship. We could never crack that egg to have them talk about, what it was like. And now I can understand that it was likely due to just trauma, not just stubbornness, because I wanted to hear those stories, but I was never able to get them to share that with me, partly because they felt like it wasn't something that they wanted to remember. So I just had to come to sort of respect that. When you think about your own grandparents, your own relationships with with your grandmothers and your grandfathers. How did this experience change or evolve the way that you considered not only their relationship to you, but the stories that you may or may not have known completely?
I think this project in a lot of ways was born, or the interest in the seniors came from me not feeling very close to my grandparents. So, I lost my grandfathers pretty early on, and then I didn't live or grow up near my grandmas, and they also didn't speak very much English, if at all. So it was, we would spend time together, but it's hard to communicate. There's a lot of barriers to communicating. So even though I love them, it was very difficult to, and I think I wanted to get to know them better and to understand them better. So in hindsight, after talking with hundreds of people, I think I do better understand my grandmas better and where they're coming from, because a lot of the stories that we hear are similar and have a lot of overlap with my family history. So, my mom's side immigrated from southern China, and my grandma worked in sewing factories, and she brought over paper sons and had to leave, children behind in China. There's a lot of similarities that we hear over and over. And so through the project, even though my grandmas have passed, it encouraged me to ask my parents more and to dig deeper, because like you, they didn't offer up a lot of these stories when I was growing up. So I didn't know so much of my family history, but more recently I've been asking lots of questions, trying to get dates, trying to get, figure out the family tree and writing it all down so that there's at least a bit of a family history record. It's been beautiful that this project has opened up my curiosity to look towards my own family too, because so much of that was not discussed growing up. And like Valerie mentioned and you observed, there's a lot of trauma that goes on, especially with immigrating and living through wars and being separated from family. So that has been a cool thing to learn more about my own family, though.
Yeah, see you nodding your head, Valerie.
Both of you brought up like your parents not sharing as much, and I think it's about having the space for parents to talk about it, because we can come kind of like reporter style, like, hey, mom and dad, like what happened here? And they might not be ready for that. I had this really sweet experience with my mom in Vietnam where we're like, because of the time difference, we're both awake at like 5 a.m. And she told some deep stories that I've never heard before that were really personal. And I think it was just the context of being in Vietnam again brought up a lot of memories for her. So I think I'm like, to hear more stories, I'm trying to like leave more space. Maybe it comes out when you're cooking rather than when you're asking questions. Maybe it comes out when you're just on scheduling weekly phone calls and there's a silence, and maybe they'll bring up something, or something you say reminds them of something. So that's something that came to mind, was just like having more opportunities for stories to naturally come up. But in regards to my own grandparents, one thing I learned from the project was that my grandma and I dress pretty similar, which is something we talk about in the book. We both prefer our like kind of high-waisted pants rather than wearing dresses or skirts. Like Andria's grandma, my grandma was also a seamstress. It was good to kind of see that commonality through other kind of people that we interviewed. And what's really nice about this project is that we get to think about our grandparents on the daily basis, which isn't something I did before Chinatown Pretty. Through interviews, through swapping stories with people that have seen our project, we get to talk about senior citizens and then in turn our own grandparents on a daily basis. And my step-grandma, Anna Lee, who's in the book, passed away 2 years ago, but she's very much alive. Like, I get to talk about her every day, and I inherited half her closet and I wear them, on a weekly basis. So it feels nice to keep them in spirit through this project.
In my job at the Huntington Library and Art Museum, I digitize parts of their extensive collection of artworks, documents, and books. I'm currently photographing letters from the 17th century that were used as evidence in England's effort to abolish slavery. Holding these documents in my hands is both surreal and humbling. Handling these materials is a unique experience that I believe goes to the importance of the physical object, especially when it comes to photography. Though I look at countless images on a computer screen or on my phone, nothing replaces looking at a photograph on a printed page, especially in the form of a book. When the Charcoal Book Club wanted to sponsor the show, I agreed immediately because I believed in what they were doing, showcasing great work on the printed page. They are helping to promote and showcase the work of photographers who are producing exceptional work and deserve an audience. It's a big reason why I think you should become a member and experience those great titles for yourself. They offer first edition books showcasing the best talents in contemporary photography. But if you don't like that month's selection, you can choose another of their titles of similar value. They offer free shipping to the US, Canada, and the UK. It's subsidized elsewhere. Join the club at charcoalbookclub.com today and remember to use the code TheCandidFrame at checkout and receive a 10% discount on your first membership payment. As COVID restrictions are lessened, people are planning to get out, vacation, or just enjoy a long weekend. For photographers, this means finally being able to get out and make photographs on a city street, in a national park, or while vacationing in a foreign city. It's time to take that camera bag that has been collecting dust for the past year and doing something with it. But you might also see this as an opportunity to try out some new gear, be it a lens or a camera that you've been considering over this long period. LensRentals.com provides you the means to test the waters with that piece of kit before you commit to buy. They have a large inventory of photographic gear from cameras, lenses, lighting, and more. Regardless of what you need or what you need it for, they have it, and all for a reasonable and fair price. If you're worried about something bad happening while using their gear, they offer 2 different insurance options, so your rental is protected against damage and theft. So use it worry-free. Check out their inventory and save 10% on your first order when you sign up for their newsletter at lensrentals.com/newsletter. And thanks to those of you who financially support The Candid Frame. Your belief in what we do means the world to us, and it's helped us through so many growing pains. I can't thank you enough. But if you haven't yet, you can help contribute to our work by becoming a Patreon supporter today. You can do that by contributing $5, $10, $20 or more a month by visiting patreon.com/thecandidframe. Just $5 a month from you can make a big difference. Thank you so much for your kindness and your help. Yeah, I found myself thinking about my own grandmother a lot looking through your book. Not that I remember her having a particular fashion style, but I just found myself thinking about what I did remember of her, which was how thin and strong her fingers were. She had these very, very long fingers, and her laugh, which my mother shares, as my mom's in her 80s now. When she laughs, I hear my grandmother's laugh. And it's just nice to feel connected in that way to them and their family history, even if I don't know all the details. You talk about one of the things that really piqued my interest is you guys talk about getting together over dim sum, and throughout the book, people talk about families getting together for dim sum. And for me, tell me about that aspect of the culture, because it came up over and over again. And I'd just like to get a greater understanding of what that's about.
Yeah, well, definitely in Asian culture, a lot of connection and family time is around food. So gathering around food, and literally in dim sum restaurants, you're gathered around a large circular table. You got the lazy Susan going. It's very communal. It's very loud usually. And yeah, there's just so many memories made over food, including dim sum. And that was, I didn't grow up around a lot of Asian people, there weren't really strong Asian communities, but I do remember there would be like one Chinese restaurant that we could go and have dim sum. And that was how, when I was young, that was something that connected me to my heritage when there wasn't really much else around me is the food. So I think for me, that's always been a thread that can connect me back to being Chinese.
I'm so glad you brought up the dim sum because with COVID, a lot of us haven't been able to dine with our family, especially at dim sum where it's usually indoors with round tables and dim sum carts passing by that you need to flag down. So yeah, thanks for the reminder. I hope it's something we can get back into again and maybe incorporate into our lives, now that we have an appreciation for that type of experience.
I think it's something that a lot of us have an appreciation for. I know I do. That how much that time with family and friends around food was so important. For the entire year, the only thing I fixated about is the next time I was going to be able to share a meal with people I care about. That's it. Nothing else. It wasn't going off on vacation. It wasn't being able to go to the beach. It was like, no, I just want to be in a room, eating good food, talking, laughing, drinking, and having a good time. And that's what's precious to me. And I think that despite all the adversity that the past year has delivered to all of us, that so many of us have come to recognize that thing is really important. That connection to somebody else. You guys were working on this project for 5 years, which is going on 6 or more at this point, 5 or 6 years.
We started in 2014.
2014, okay.
So we worked on capturing and meeting people for about 5 years, and the book project was another 2 years. So it's been about 7 years at this point.
It first started for a magazine article, and then it turned into a sort of a blog, and then eventually into this book. Tell me about that sort of gestation from one form to another, and how you came to, feel eventually that this thing needed to be a book.
I think one of my favorite things about starting out projects is just to start out doing it. Usually for me, finding a partner in crime is really helpful, and then seeing where it evolves. Because we didn't set out to create even an Instagram or let alone a book. We just were so stoked on this fashion sense that we pitched it to an online magazine, and, we had shot for a few months, and, it was really well received, but, we're like, oh, that's great. Like, let's move on. Or, that was a great experience. And then 1 or 2 years later, Chinatown Community Development Center, which is a nonprofit in Chinatown, reached out to us, and they're like, we love this website. We'd love to do a photo show with you and collaborate with you. And we're like, one, it's not a website. It was just an article. But yeah, sure, let's do it. And that catalyzed us to create an Instagram because we're shooting a lot for the show. And then, start a Tumblr where we could share the photos that we were capturing in the interviews. And that experience was a success. And then we just kept going, just shooting, interviewing, updating, posting. And then 5 years later, we had enough to put it in a book. And I think putting it in physical form was really important to us because, there was so many hours in Chinatown, so many people, and, the Instagram grid is only so big. And we wanted to be able to showcase it and have people look at it a little bit closer and a little bit slower rather than scrolling or swiping, really looking at the beautiful details because there are so many, and spending time with the stories that accompany the photos.
You covered Chinatowns in Los Angeles, Oakland, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, and Vancouver. Did the impetus to visit those various Chinatowns come as a result of making the decision to produce the book, or had that happened even before then?
We had visited Los Angeles and New York at that point. Before we had started to discuss the book, and being in the Bay Area, we had also covered Oakland, and we started the project in San Francisco. So we had some photos from 4 cities, but not a ton. Maybe it's just that we happened to be in LA and would go out for a couple hours. But when we did sign with our publisher, Chronicle Books, they really recommended that we go to more Chinatowns and get more photos and stories from other Chinatowns, as well as visit a Chinatown in Canada. And that was actually kind of a marketing move so that they could really market the book in Canada, because since the contents would cover that country. So that was sort of the reason that we went to Vancouver. But, Vancouver does have one of the largest, I think, Chinese populations in North America. So it did make sense to visit there. And we had a wonderful time there and just connected with a lot of young people trying to, preserve Chinatown as a neighborhood and doing a lot of great grassroots organizing around that. And the people there as well were very welcoming and very open. So our success rate in Canada as well as Chicago was probably more like 70%. So we had a lot more luck talking to people in the Midwest as well as Canada. So those stereotypes about Canadians and Midwest people being really nice actually rang true for us.
Tell me about the reaction to the book, not only from the people you may have photographed and who got to see themselves in the book, but family members and other people who wrote or who have met you and given you feedback on it. What's been the response?
When I showed my grandma the book, she just hit me and was like, "I'm old," and like laughed. And I'm like, "Grandma, that's the whole point." We get these beautiful messages through Instagram and email because our book came out during the pandemic. We weren't able to do a book tour and like hear the responses in person. So we've been just like getting messages. And the other day, someone wrote, my nephew or someone or my cousin, my 3-year-old cousin or nephew came over, a very, very young kid, and saw the book on my coffee table and picked it up and said, "Is grandma in this book?" And they said, as an Asian American, it's not every day or every book where you get to say that. Is grandma in this book? And so that really touched me.
That's great. How about you, Andrea?
I've kind of been surprised at how well received it's been amongst seniors. So whether they're in the book or just the age, like over 70, I've heard feedback from friends and my parents' friends my parents are, old enough to be in the book right now. But yeah, I think they've been delighted to see people that look like them, to see that kind of representation. So that's really been sweet to hear. But yeah, we've had a great reception and have received some really kind notes. And I think hearing from family members like grandkids, kids, nieces and nephews, when they discover that their family member actually is in the book. We got a note from someone who saw an article that was in the Cut magazine online, and they had said, "Oh, I wonder if my family or my great aunt and great uncle might be in the book." And there they were. They were actually like one of the first photos. They're the Jangs, who I mentioned before, wearing the bright yellow matching sweatsuits.
Yeah, they're amazing.
And so so great. They wrote us a note. And to hear that we've done their spirit justice, that we've been able to capture them and their essence has been great feedback as well.
I have a little story as well. Today, Eva Chen, who's like head of fashion at Instagram, she has a copy of the book and was like, Chinatown Pretty is my style inspo for today. So you have influencers and fashion people and Vogue online and Vogue magazine posting about it. But then, we had someone reach out from a government agency who works on affordable housing. And these are a lot of their clients. So it speaks to not only like people in the fashion world and Asian Americans, but also government agencies and museums and institutions. And it's just really beautiful to see how this type of like humanistic, human-centered stories can hit all sorts of people.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, because that was also a thing that I wanted to talk to you about is the whole issue of affordable housing for seniors, and how these communities that are made up largely of seniors, are sometimes being pushed out of those communities because of gentrification and development. And this community that has been thriving for so long is threatened. I think one of the people in there was talking about she pays like $3,000 a month in rent. And there's another person who's paying $800 in rent. I don't know I can't remember if they were in the same city or not, but that really kind of speak to the disparity in terms of, the cost of living in these different cities. Can you speak to how, those concerns of development are impacting, these various communities that you visited?
It's a big concern. I think for every Chinatown that we visited, and pretty much every Chinatown that exists, they might have been around for decades, but they tend to be in locations now that are considered prime real estate. Like in San Francisco, it's sort of in the heart of financial districts. So it's definitely a concern about developers encroaching on it. But what we've learned through the project is that the Chinatowns that we see today, they're changing and evolving, but they exist, and the ones that remain livable as a neighborhood exist because there's a lot of nonprofit and behind-the-scenes work going on, a lot of work to protect the community, to protect sort of the aesthetic of it as well, like especially in San Francisco. If you've been to that Chinatown, there's so much interesting kind of architecture. It was rebuilt after the earthquake. Very colorful, kind of almost like a faux, almost like a set. Some of it looks so colorful and was kind of meant to be attractive to visitors, actually. So that's being preserved: the architecture, the livability, the affordable housing. And through the project, we were able to connect with a lot of the nonprofits, and we would make sure to reach out to ones in each and every city that we visited. Because they're really the insiders. We're outsiders to Chinatown. We love it and appreciate it, but they're the ones that are working every day on the ground, connecting with the people who live there, connecting with the merchants. So they really know it inside out, and they're really the best people to kind of work with and volunteer with and raise funds for to help ensure the future of Chinatown.
Yeah, you're each storytellers in your own way. And how has this experience influenced the way you feel that you tell stories, whether it's in words or whether it's in photographs?
For me, it's an attitude or state of mind. So we come into this celebrating and just wanting to share, the awesome fashion and stories that we've come across in Chinatowns. And celebration brings a lot of different type of people in. It welcomes you in, it draws you in. So that's something I'm going to take with me, is like, how can we approach whatever social issue or story with a lens of joy and celebration?
And for you, Andrea?
I think through the lens of really treating everyone like a deep and complicated human. I think a lot of the people that we met through the project, you might live in the same city as them, you might live in the same neighborhood and brush shoulders with them. But there's so many barriers. It's really hard to sort of access them in a way and to communicate. So, but it doesn't mean they should be ignored or really dismissed. So this project, in a way, the way that it sort of broke it, I think people have responded so positively to it is because I think there's a deep curiosity about other humans, but sometimes you're not able to access it. So just thinking about everyone that you encounter or pass on the street, that they might have these really beautiful stories to tell, and they might have a lot of wisdom to share. So that's something I've learned, is having that chance to speak with a lot of them and to hear their stories is really kind of made me think about people on the street in a different way.
Well, my last question that I ask each guest is I ask them to recommend usually a photographer for our listeners to discover and explore. And it can be anyone, someone you've long admired or recently discovered. But it can, in this case, since we have two of you, it could be a photographer, it could be a writer, or some other creative that you feel people should check out. So who would they be and why?
I'm going to need a second on this.
Most people do.
I'll go ahead and shout out Michael Jang. So I actually recently bought his monograph, and I have it right here. His monograph is called "Who is Michael Jang?" And yeah, it's Beautiful book. Are you familiar with his work?
No, I'm not.
He is a California photographer. He went to art school, I think at Cal Arts, and then later SFAI in San Francisco. And he's worked as a professional photographer for decades, and he had like a 40-year archive of personal work. He shoots, a lot of black and white 35 millimeter street photography. And I guess back in the day, SF MoMA, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, used to have sort of an open door policy for photographers where you could drop off photos and they'd consider it for their collection. So I think he decided to drop off some of his early work in the early 2000s. And the story goes is that they loved it, and he was relatively unknown then because he'd just been shooting professionally but hadn't shown sort of the special personal work. And I really love his series called The Jangs, where he actually turns the lens on his cameras. And this is when I think he was still in art school, early 70s. And he documented his aunt and uncle and his two cousins. And the photos are they're so spontaneous. There's so much humor in them. I mean, just looking through the book the other day, I was laughing out loud, which I feel like I don't laugh out loud with too many photos, but I just couldn't help it. They were just such funny moments that he was able to capture. He's just super talented. And I think when I first saw his work, probably over 15, maybe 20 years ago, I think that was probably soon after SF MoMA acquired some of his work. I just had not seen a lot of photos depicting Asian Americans, especially from that era. So, whenever I see a photo of Asians from the 70s, I also think about my own family's photo albums, and just it's so cool to see that in a fine art context because you don't see that every day. So yeah, I mean his work is just brilliant, and I think he's seen like a huge he's gotten a lot of visibility I think recently too. So it's really cool to see that kind of work out in the world and a lot more people coming across it.
Well, thank you for that. I look forward to checking out his work. And Valerie?
There is an Instagram called 1721 Women. It's run by Doris Ho Kane, who's a researcher, archivist. And they're coming out with a book with Penguin Books spring 2022. And their project profiles or explains great Asian American women across history, filmmakers, artists, activists. And for me, I don't know too much about Asian Americans across history and their contributions. So this will be a great way to learn and to find new heroes, find new people to put on pedestals and to celebrate and to draw inspiration from. I think oftentimes we pull from the same hat of names because that's what's given to us in mass media and in history. And I'm so excited for this book to come out for for my generation, for future generations to be like, here are like a bunch of badass women that we can talk about and celebrate and learn from and continue to add to the conversation with.
Well, thank you for those recommendations and thanks for a great book. I really am enjoying it. And best of luck with all the efforts going forward.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. What a nice little Friday wind down.
Thanks to Andria Lo and Valerie Luu for joining us. Find out more about their project by visiting ChinatownPretty.com. Your thoughts and feelings about this show matter. If you haven't already, please write a review on Apple Podcasts or any service that you use to listen to podcasts. It helps us to stand out among the many thousands of podcasts that are out there. Your voice makes a difference. And remember, you can support the show by contributing to our Patreon effort or make a one-time or recurring donation via PayPal. Thanks to Patrick Grady for his recent contribution. I'm also going to be leading my Using Your Life to Launch Your Photography online workshop in July. Find out more by clicking on the link on the website, in the show notes, or visit nabechicreative.com. We also provide a series of ebooks on photography available for purchase on our website. It's my way of sharing my experience and knowledge and another way for you to support the show. And if you can't find every episode of the show on whatever service you listen to podcasts, download the Candid Frame app, which is available for Apple iOS and Android. And because of your generosity, it's free to download and use. No additional purchases are required. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker, and our music is from Kevin MacLeod, whose royalty-free music can be found at incompetech.com. And this is Ibadian X, and this is The Candid Frame.